How's it going, everybody? This is Laredoans Behind the Business. I'm your host, Jeffrey Ramos. This is episode 9 with self-published author R.H. Grund. He also goes by Roy. Thanks for coming on the show. How are you?
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I'm doing very well. I've been promoting the book, so this was a great opportunity to talk more about it and reach a wider audience.
Yeah, definitely. I know we spoke off the camera a little bit over a month ago, and it was my first time meeting you. You said that you're a teacher at Harmony, English teacher, right?
Yes, I am.
Cool. Elaborate on more. Tell us about yourself and tell the audience, basically about yourself a little bit. Get them to introduce yourself.
Sure. So, like you said, I've been teaching high school English for about 7 years. Technically 6, and I taught at a university prior to that for 1 year as an adjunct.
That's right.
Yeah, so that was after I got my master's degree. But the writing I've been doing for decades since I was in middle school.
Wow.
So I think around grade 6, I started writing. I got into what's known as fan fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And so fan fiction, for those who don't know, is when you write about stories and characters that already exist.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, I see you like Star Wars.
Yeah.
If I wrote a story about Boba Fett or Luke Skywalker, I'm not George Lucas, it would be considered fan fiction.
Right.
So for several years throughout high school, I did that. And then I think after a couple of years, I started moving into original writing. And that's when I said, why don't I write a novel?
Yeah.
And that was where the aspirations to publish books originated from.
That's cool. So I know I've had several guests on the show before, such as Manny Garcia. He's a musician, really talented kid. And sometimes I get the question, people ask me, well, that's not really a business. But I like to say otherwise, that he goes through, he's having to basically self-promote himself, and that's kind of where you're at. Tell us a little bit about the business aspect, if you will, what goes into self-publishing your own book, because that's a big feat, I guess.
Sure. So right now in publishing, there are 2 main tracks or avenues you could take.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is conventionally known as traditional publishing. So this is where you take a manuscript that you have and you submit it to a publisher or a press, and then the publisher, they have like an editorial team, and the editorial team will review the book, and they'll decide, oh, we like this, or no, we're going to pass on it.
Right.
And this is what I was trying to do for the last several years. I was trying to get a literary agent. So you send the agent what's known as a query letter. The agent reviews it. They request more material. It's a back and forth. And then if they take you on as a client, they can decide, okay, we'll network with the editors that we know and try to find a place for the book. So in that case, the author still has to self-promote. Obviously, you don't just sit there and say, okay, let me wait for
money to
roll in.
Yeah.
But the publisher does take care of a lot of the legal stuff, negotiating contracts, developing cover art, helping you edit the book. So they offload a lot of the work that you would do independently.
Basically all the legwork, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So self-publishing, if you say, you know what, I'm going to publish independently, you have to do pretty much everything about the book yourself.
Yeah.
So that goes beyond just writing the book, which can take a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
This book, the one that I just recently published, Room of Cloth, that I wrote back in 2015 and then probably edited and revised it over a span of a couple of years. Wow. I wrote another book in the meantime because I wanted to seem more marketable to publishers during that submission process. So by the time I even thought about self-publishing, this was last year in the fall, I'd already put a lot of time into the book itself. Different agents had asked me for feedback, and then, they had given me feedback, and, they wanted different edits changed. And so I had done that too. So it was a lot of back and forth with the novel. And then I had to, as I was moving into self-publishing, research, okay, what does it take to sell a book on my own and print it? Fortunately, we have platforms like Amazon that are what is known as print on demand. Mm-hmm. So if you order my book from Amazon, they just produce it on the spot and then they ship it to you. So I don't have to have inventory, at my house or in a warehouse or anything.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So fortunately, those platforms exist and they take care of that aspect. But I had to register as a business. I had to set up a self-proprietorship. I had to get it registered with the county. I had to open up a business bank account.
You had to register with the county?
I did, yes.
What did you have to register with the county?
Just the business.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
you just register
Gotcha.
as the business, and you have to set up your account. If it were just a novelty, like, oh, I'm just going to print the book,
Yeah.
give it to, 5 copies
Mhm.
among friends and family, you wouldn't have to do that. But
Right.
it is recommended that if you're looking to make money off this and if you're going to turn it into like a career,
Mhm.
then you do have to, take care of yourself legally.
Right.
I had to take care of the cover art, so I know it's kind of minimalist looking, but I did this. There's a photography of me on the back. I had to get a photographer to take portraits of me.
Right. Yeah.
Had to, again, make sure that I formatted the book properly so that it could actually be printed.
Yeah.
I had to register the ISBN, so on the back of the book, there's that number.
Mhm.
So this is
the barcode, so to speak.
the barcode. It's a registry number for the book, and so that costs money too. So there are a lot of different fees associated with publishing the book, to say nothing of handling social media, promoting yourself on Instagram, Twitter,
Yeah.
hosting a website.
It's a lot of legwork, basically.
Correct. And you have to
So-
wear a lot of different hats.
Yeah. So you mentioned like buying your own ISBN and like stuff like that. Does having a publisher or like, being contracted under a publisher, they basically take away all of that? Like, do you still have to pay for that? Or are you still paying for like your ISBN and all that stuff?
That's a good question. So I don't know the specifics necessarily, but I would say that a publisher will probably reap all their money from you through the percentages that they sell from your books.
Got it.
So if you're published traditionally, you're looking at maybe getting back 15-20%
Wow.
of your royalties, because the rest is going to all those other services that I was talking about.
Right.
So all the work the publisher is doing, they're taking chunks out of your money that you're earning to cover those fees.
Right.
If you have an agent, the agent's taking another 20-15%. So just because you're published traditionally doesn't mean that you're suddenly going to make a lot of money,
Right.
because there are so many other books out there, so many other authors in your same position. You're still having to promote, and you're still having to find that niche that's going to, make money. Publishers, for instance, they won't just accept any manuscript. Like, one of the points of feedback that I got was that if a book is too short and if it doesn't fall into the sweet spot range that they like.
Right.
So, for instance, I published a horror novel. They want that to be 80 to 90,000, at least
Words,
for a
right?
debut. Words.
Yeah.
And so I fell under that. I was at 68. So I was told, you need to make your book longer,
Yeah.
because a publisher, however marketable your book is probably going to lose money on printing it, because they're going to spend so much money on printing. They need to make sure that they get something that's worthwhile to print,
Right.
and that a reader's going to say, okay, that's worth me shelling out 15 to 20 bucks for.
So, like, let's say you wrote a preface or like a prologue or whatever. Is the story only, or like, is the 80,000 words only the story itself, or is it everything in the book?
I think it would fall under everything in the story itself.
Okay,
so
yeah,
that
'cause-
wouldn't necessarily include like table of contents.
Right, yeah, because that's
Or
what I
a
was gonna say. I
preface.
mean, you could lengthen it a little bit by like making a preface or something, but I guess it would have to be just the story itself.
It would just be the content.
That's crazy. And now, so you said that you were being looked at by a publisher, right?
It was an agent.
It was an agent. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Okay, so you're being looked at by an agent, and they told you to lengthen it. Did that agent tell you, we don't really like this part of the story? How about you change it, or maybe change the wording? Because I feel like, I don't want to say Hollywood, but you hear all those stories about like music artists, actors, and they tell them to act a certain way or do a certain thing because that's what the norm is, and not what they'll be accepted as. Is that kind of the same thing in the book writing world, or?
Definitely. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of push right now for authors to either come from underrepresented backgrounds or to be writing about underrepresented demographics. So for instance, like BIPOC, queer, LGBTQ, there's a lot of emphasis on those populations right now. So if you're writing something that maybe a publisher doesn't think is necessarily going to be seen as appropriate or politically correct, they may ask you to make changes to the novel. as far as, how are you representing a certain demographic of people, or maybe what you're writing isn't accurate, let's say, to conventional knowledge, or maybe you're writing something that's very inaccurate historically.
Yeah.
So they'll be looking at things like that to see where they need to make changes. In my case, I wasn't asked by that agent to really edit anything concerning content.
Mm-hmm.
It was just making it longer because it just fell short of
The word count. Yeah.
I will say she had only read about the first 50 pages.
Okay.
So if she had read further into the book, maybe she might have thought, oh, there needs to be some adjustments made.
Yeah.
Ultimately, she did reject the book.
Yeah.
So after I sent it back with the revisions, she did say she didn't connect with it, and I don't know specifically why. I didn't receive a lot of feedback on that front, but it could have had to do with maybe how I represented certain things, or maybe she didn't agree with some of the directions of the story.
Yeah.
It is very subjective. So unfortunately, you write a book, and if you're hoping to get it published traditionally, a lot of people do have to give the okay on it.
Right.
From your agent, if you have one, to the various editors that you're going to be working with. And at any point, you can get feedback saying, hey, we need this changed. And depending on your contract, you may have some flexibility. You may not have a lot of flexibility.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of writers, obviously, they feel very strongly about their work. They feel a sense of ownership and creative control.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if that's your only shot, you're going to feel sometimes pressured to say, no, I'm going to have to make these changes. And
yeah, you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, basically.
Yeah.
That's tough. And with the way that you wrote your book, I was mentioning to you earlier that I love the way that you wrote the book. I feel bad, again, I'm going to say this on camera. I haven't finished the whole book, but I read the first 4 chapters. And the first 4 chapters that I have read, I found them really intriguing because of the way that your characters are speaking. They're not using... basically, you're not politically correct, so to speak. Your characters are saying bad words. They're saying vulgar language.
Mm-hmm.
They're talking about each other in raw ways that you would normally find with friends or family or whatever the case may be. And that's what I really liked about your book. But this probably wasn't the question that I was going to ask, but it just reminded me. When you got, I guess, rejected, how did that feel? Like, explain a little bit more on that. Like, because I think we all know where we want to go, especially, like you think that you wrote this book and you're like, man, I'm gonna make it big time or something.
Yeah.
And then that wasn't the case, like you thought maybe, man, maybe I need to change the wording, or maybe I need to change the characters, language or something. Like what was going on in your head?
So I'll comment a little bit on what you brought up, that raw quality to the book first. So I guess when I approach writing, I'm thinking of where does the character come from and his or her perspective. So in this novel, the protagonist is somebody who comes from the streets. He's not educated. And he also doesn't care about social norms. So he is intentionally trying to come up against convention, right? He doesn't want to be...
He's like against the grain.
Pinned in a hole, yeah.
Yeah.
So he's going to have that tough, off-the-cuff type of language.
Mm.
And so that's him, right? But then, his sister, that character,
yeah,
she has a raw side too, but it's more suppressed. And so you see her as more desperate or more tired. And so those types of character traits have to come through in the language. So it just depends on the character. Sometimes I think readers assume that, a character behaves this way in the book, the author must behave that way, or the author must believe those things that the character is saying.
Yeah.
That's not the case. The character is separate from me.
Right.
Obviously, there's a little bit of me in every character. I wrote them.
Yeah.
But they are their own people, and they do take on their own traits and their own tendencies.
Mm-hmm.
So I just let that go. I respect that, and I think the more honest and transparent it is, the more it connects with the reader.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely felt that connection because that, like I said, those first 4 chapters that I was reading, your main character, like you said, he was very against the grain, going against social norms and stuff like that. But his sister was very reserved in the way that, she would need to say certain, basically like tiptoeing
Correct.
around him.
Right.
But then in her head, she was like, oh, this
Yeah.
motherfucker, and it's just
Yeah.
like, I like that. Like, that's cool,
Yeah.
So,
And that's a big tension of the relationship, right?
Right.
Which is they feel one way about the sibling, but what they can express in terms of the little dance that they do is
Right.
different. And so they both feel different things about each other, but they express completely opposite
right.
reactions.
So it's basically like, like, oh, hi, buddy,
Right.
and it's like, oh, this motherfucker, like, like,
Yeah.
and I thought that was, funny in a way, but very cool the way that you made those characters. So
Right.
that was cool.
Not to say that they don't love each other. I
Right.
mean, as you get deeper in the book, you see more of the bond, but there are a lot of different layers, and so it's representing those at different times.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as far as how did I feel after that rejection, obviously every rejection stings. I think as a writer, people don't always appreciate the amount of rejection that you face. We all face rejection in every field.
Yeah.
But a writer typically, what they call querying, right? So submitting material to agents. It's not uncommon to receive tens or dozens of rejections.
Yeah.
And they're not personalized rejections. They're just, hey, this wasn't what I was looking for. Sorry. Because think about what an agent, what his or her daily life is.
Yeah.
You sit down at your inbox, you open it up, you have hundreds of submissions that you have to go through. You're looking for reasons to reject. And it's not out of malice. It's just a natural. You can't spend the time on every single submission you get. So you're looking for reasons. And so it's not uncommon for writers to go through book after book after book and get dozens, maybe even hundreds of rejections over the span of their career before they land an agent or they land a press. So you do have to get very used to that. You just have to sort of send it out there, and you can't have expectations that it's going to go anywhere.
Right.
So you do have to say, okay, am I comfortable with never making money off this? Am I comfortable with this never going anywhere, with nobody reading my writing? And if the answer is yes, I'm comfortable with all those things, then you should do it because you have nothing to lose, everything to gain. But definitely you do have the fantasy. You think like, well, okay, it's going to go big. It's going to get the HBO 10 episode limited series. I'm going to get merchandising, right? Obviously you fantasize about things like that. That's the dream.
Yeah.
And in the case of this particular rejection, it did sting a lot because I had gotten 2 full requests before that from other agents. They had ghosted me, so I never heard back from them, even after reaching out. This was during COVID, so that process has gotten a lot harder since then.
After COVID,
okay. Reaching out to agents and editors. So this agent in particular, she seemed very complimentary. She really liked the writing. So it's similar to your point. She was complimentary about the style and the amount of description, and she thought I did a really good job. And so I felt very excited. I thought, okay,
there's a shot.
Here's somebody who is reading it, who likes it, who sees a place for it in the market. And she's asking me to do revisions, but you know what? I'll do it. So there was a fire, lit under me, and I spent 3 months doing the revisions. I sent it back to her. This was, I think, January of 2022, so a year ago. And then I didn't hear back for 6 months, and then only to get the rejection without any real specific feedback. So
that's tough, man.
That time, and it's on me. Like I blame myself for putting hope into it, because like I said, you got to go back to those original questions you ask yourself.
Right.
Am I comfortable with this going nowhere? And you have to always come back to that, because that can happen. It's just like life. You can't put all your hope into something, because more often than not, as we all know, it doesn't pan out or it changes course.
Right.
But I won't deny I was definitely depressed for a bit. There was a low period where I was thinking to myself, how long is this going to take? Because I had written other books before this one, and I had queried before, and it's a lot of work, especially with my day job. Yeah, to find time to write, edit, revise, go through that process, and it takes multiple run-throughs to get a book to where you think it's publishable or where it's worthy of reading. Yeah. So I was just thinking to myself, like, am I going to be writing book after book after book, like until in that scenario I mentioned? And
the 100th book maybe gets published.
Is it the 100th book? Is it in the next year? Is it in the next 2 years? The next 5? The next 10? Yeah. And it's always that next one too. That's the carrot. Yeah. It could be the next agent. Yeah. It could be the next editor. It could be the next project.
What made you come to that self-realization that it's like, okay, I'm not gonna, like you said, I'm not gonna make any money off of this. What made you like flip the script, basically saying, okay, I'm fine with it, just gonna let it roll? Like what, like was it after, I mean, obviously after the rejection, but like what made you come to that realization?
As far as being comfortable with not making money, I mean, that was a long time ago. Like, that's something I have to remind myself of.
Yeah.
Because I think you see a lot of people, especially on social media, and they say, "Oh, I'm going to write a book," and they have that fantasy, like it's going to be super easy. I'm going to land the publishing deal, and I'm going to make money, and it's not super easy. Like, you're one out of 100,000,
Yeah.
million.
Yeah.
How many people have dreams of wanting to break into a creative industry? It doesn't have to be writing. It could be acting, or it could be script writing, or painting, or whatever it is. Trying to break into these very subjective, difficult to enter creative worlds.
Saturated worlds. That's
Exactly.
my next question, but I'll let you finish. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it is very challenging. So you have to go in expecting nothing. Now, what made me flip and go to independent publishing? Because I thought about that obviously throughout the course of it, because it's been recommended as something like you have control, you make all the money. But my thinking was, I'm going to go with a traditional publisher because they're going to help me with all those other services that I was mentioning before.
Right, all the legwork and stuff.
Marketing, they're going to help me with getting the book into bookstores and helping with visibility.
Yeah.
But what really kind of made the change, it was a student actually of mine who I was talking to about it. And this student has dreams of being an entrepreneur.
Nice.
So he just said, sir, you could go home today, like that day, get on the computer and just start the process.
Yeah.
Like
for self-publishing.
For self-publishing, nothing is stopping you. You're stopping you. You're stopping yourself.
Right.
And I thought about that, and really it was just the recognition that he was correct, but it was that the thing that I was hoping for would, like I said, maybe never happen.
Right.
Or it could happen 10, 20 years from now, and all that time would be wasted.
Yeah.
Waiting for that opportunity, waiting for that agent or editor to wake up on the right side of the bed that morning
and happen to stumble upon your email,
see
and
the submission, read it, feel the right way about it. It was just a lot of those like serendipitous things have to work in your favor.
Yeah, like you're playing the lottery almost.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then the alternative is I could publish it, give up a lot of the privileges that come with having a publisher on my side, but at least that's a guarantee. The book is going to be out there.
Yeah.
I can control the promotion. I can get the profits. I can make it work for me.
Right.
However challenging that may be, at least something's happening and I can build momentum.
Yeah.
So honestly, I kick myself now because I could have been doing this like 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And where would it be now? I don't know.
Well,
so we're going to find out.
Yeah, you're going to find out. Man, what was that question I was going to ask you? I was literally, oh yeah, in the saturated, every field or I would say every hobby or every, profession has its, I would say it's saturated no matter where you go. Music, books, photography, for my example, wherever you go, it's saturated. How did you feel, or what was your opinion coming into the book world? Because you go to Barnes and Nobles, you go to any bookstore. I mean, there's an insane amount of books. Like how, for me, I would say, how am I going to compete, or how would I even imagine being, in a Barnes and Nobles or something like that when the market is so saturated? But I mean, there's always room for different stories, of course, right? So like, what's your take on that?
Sure. I think in my case, because I'm leaning into horror and not necessarily thriller, but kind of that more horror-oriented space, you do have competition there, but not as much as in the really popular in-demand genres like the young adult fantasy or young adult post-apocalyptic. So I think in my case, I just thought, okay, I'm going into something a little more niche, so it'll be easier for me to carve out a space for myself. And really what I am trying to do is not so much compete, but to build up readership and to say, I want to be one of those authors where people read this book, for example, or they read the next one and they say, okay, this is somebody I'm going to be like auto buy. I'm going to be looking for this particular person. So you want to build a kind of a dedicated following.
Gotcha.
You don't necessarily want to muscle out other books.
Right.
Especially because
you want to be like people's influence, basically.
Correct.
Yeah.
And obviously being realistic, like I'm not going to be able to compete with Josh Mallory, who wrote Bird Box, that has a Netflix adaptation. I'm not going to compete with Stephen King or Joe Hill, like, I'm not going to. I just don't have the push or the influence.
Right.
But what I can do is find a little space where I can call my own and I can attract people to come over there.
Yeah.
It is, of course, very challenging because the benefits of self-publishing obviously don't just extend to me. They extend to literally everyone. Everyone watching this could go on Amazon right now, look
up the book,
a PDF, and now you have a book on the market.
Right.
So that's why there's a lot of stigma attached with self-published titles, because there's no quality control. Anybody can publish anything. It doesn't have to be good. It doesn't have to be bad. It just sort of exists there, and anyone can see it or buy it. So there's no guarantee that what I'm putting out into the world is high quality.
Right.
Whereas with a traditional publisher, at least it's being edited, it's being read by people who are familiar with the industry, they're familiar with expectations.
Yeah.
So you're fighting not only against everyone else that you're competing with, you're also fighting against the stigma of being a self-published writer.
Right.
So,
you're the underdog.
Correct.
Yeah.
You're like Sisyphus pushing the boulder up the hill.
Yeah. Yeah.
But my part of my goal is really to appear as legitimate as possible. So I tried really hard to make the book seem professional. I try really hard to make myself seem like a serious, credible writer. I take what I do seriously. I'm not just trying to make money. I mean, obviously I would like to.
Yeah.
It's
a bonus.
Let's be honest. Like that is a motivation, but I've always just been more interested in getting the work out there and having people read it and maybe take something away from it.
Yeah.
And I've gotten people who have read this book since it's been published, and they'll message me and they'll say, you know what, this is like amazing. Like this is an incredible book. Like I'm going to be talking about this. Like you should really be proud of yourself. And that's amazing. Like that makes me feel like validated. Like, okay, I'm doing something right.
Yeah, definitely. One of the questions that my wife had asked is, she said, how is self-publishing a book any different than seniors writing an essay for a scholarship? I don't know if that's a valid question or, what do you think on that?
That's interesting. Obviously, I work with seniors in my day job, and we do write a lot of college application essays and a lot of scholarship application essays. I would say when you're writing a book, obviously the scope of the work is very different. So an essay is 500 words, maybe 1,000 words, whereas a book is 80,000 words. So you're multiplying that exponentially.
Right.
They're similar in that you are selling yourself, in a sense, because the book has to reach certain expectations of audiences, and a student's essay has to, of course, seem marketable too, because the student has to convince the reader, hey, I'm worth this money or this program or
scholarship or
whatever it is. So I do tell my students, funnily enough, I'm the editor, telling them, hey, that maybe doesn't play very well. Or this experience that you're writing about, you don't want to come across as too negative. You want to come across as more positive. You want to connect in a way. And sometimes I'll even be kind of cynical and be like, leverage this part of your background or leverage this part of the experience. Get them to see you as somebody who's sympathetic or as the underdog.
Yeah.
So in the sense that you're marketing yourself, it is very similar, but totally different.
Writing styles
and industries, of course, and every genre that you're writing for is different in terms of the fiction world. So I'm writing a horror novel. If I call it horror, that means that fan base has certain expectations of what that means for the book, that it's going to read a certain way, or it's going to contain
like suspense or something like that.
It's going to have certain type of imagery, tropes that they expect.
Right.
For instance, if I wrote a romance novel, the expectation is, well, it's going to be the really mousy girl meets the debonair guy,
right,
who at 25 has a multi-billion-dollar business, and he takes her in the yacht and the jet and whatever. It's the wish fulfillment aspect.
Yeah.
But the expectation is that by the end of the book, they might have some conflict, but they're going to come back together.
Yeah.
And if they don't, it's because there's book 2, book 3, book 4, book 5 waiting for you.
Yeah.
So there's always the sense of like, this is going to work out positively. It's just a matter of getting there, right? That's the roller coaster ride that the reader expects to get from the book.
Yeah.
So if you don't play into that, so if you write a romance book and then at the end of the book, they don't get together, or at the end of the series, book 8, they don't get together.
Yeah.
Okay, what was the point of everything that we were going through?
Yeah.
So as a reader, I would feel like I paid money and I got
cheated
for it. Yeah, I got cheated for it. Or I got scammed.
Yeah.
I got scammed. So you do have to be considerate of that when you're writing. And similarly to the scholarship essay, you do need to make sure that you're meeting those expectations, because if you go too far off script, there's some deviation allowed. But if you go too far off, you're not giving the audience what they want.
Right.
They're going to say, okay, this guy doesn't understand what I want as a reader.
Right.
So I'm not going to read his other works.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to tell my friends who are other readers, avoid him because he doesn't know what we're looking for.
Right. Yeah, he doesn't understand the question being asked, basically.
Correct.
So do you feel, you mentioned the editor or the contractor, basically, you have to send them the submission, and, they basically have to read it on a good day. Do you feel like you're like that sometimes with your students? Like, C or like B minus, know, like, do you feel like you're like that sometimes?
Sometimes, yeah. I do make sure to always have a rubric that I refer to. And the rubric is, my students will probably laugh if they watch this, but the rubric has a 5-point interval. Okay. So you can never get a 97 or a 96.
So
you
multiples of 5, basically,
or 100 or 85 or 80
yeah.
or 90. And so that, I think, eliminates some of the ambiguity, because when you grade a paper, obviously, what's the difference between a 93 and a 92?
Right.
I, as an English teacher who spent many years grading essays and training for that, I could probably tell you, or I could intuit, this is a 94. It's not quite a 95. But then the student's going to say, what does that mean? Like, what are you even looking at to make that decision? So
it's funny that you say that, because Amanda just finished her second semester of college, and she took English. I think it was English 1302. Sorry if it's not the right English, okay? But, she was saying she wrote an essay, or she wrote a discussion, and she said, it's a 97. Like, it's a fucking 97. Like, why didn't, what's up with the 3 points? Yeah. Or like, like, why can't she just round it up or whatever? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like, explain a little bit more on that. Like,
that's tricky. I mean, a lot of composition.
But it's all subjective too, right? It could all be based on the teacher's.
It is.
Yeah.
So what you mentioned earlier, if I come into grading essays and I'm tired or I'm cranky, I don't really want to do it.
Yeah.
That's the difference between me paying more attention and paying less attention. That's the difference between me putting more feedback or less feedback, or me saying, I'm gonna let them get away with this comma splice versus I'm not gonna let them get away with this comma splice. Like, we've gone over this. I've given them feedback multiple times. They should know by now.
Yeah.
For example, we're excited when you have your references at the end of an essay. They need to be in alphabetical order.
Okay. Yeah.
It doesn't matter what documentation style, Chicago, MLA, APA.
Yeah.
Need to be alphabetical order. And I feel like I've drilled this into the kids' heads.
And they don't get it.
I still get essays where they're not in alphabetical order.
Yeah.
And obviously, the kids are stressed. They're at the end of the semester. They're just like, I just need to get this paper in. They're not necessarily thinking about those little details.
Right.
But those are the little details that matter.
Right.
So to her point, what's the difference between 97 and 100? Those little details.
Yeah.
That if you had polished, if you had taken the time to say, I'm going to write my paper a week in advance, similar to the book, right? I'm going to give myself time to edit and revise it.
Yeah.
And come back to a fresh eyes. I'm going to get a second opinion. I'm going to ask the instructor for feedback.
Right.
A lot of students are very shy. They're timid. They don't want to reach out to you because they feel like you're going to judge them. And maybe you are going to judge them, but
yeah, I mean, I would say you're definitely judging them.
Right.
But in the aspect of their paper, their writing style, and their mechanics, basically, not the person themselves.
Correct. Yeah, it has nothing to do with them. Now, if a student had an entire 2 months, for example, to write a paper and then asked me for an extension at the end, I'm going to be pretty judgmental about that. But again, like, if you take the steps necessary to do the work, get feedback, recognize that writing is not the first draft. That first draft it might look totally different when you're done with it.
Right.
It's what we call the writing process. Writing is process oriented. It's not product oriented.
Right.
Then you give yourself that leeway to make the mistakes and fix them. So the students who score really well, I can tell that they edited the writing.
Yeah.
That they sat down with it and they read it again and they came to me for help. And it's not a guarantee of 100, but they're probably going to lean into the high A territory because they put in the work.
Right.
Whereas the person who writes in the 30 minutes before the 11:59 deadline, hopped up on Monster or whatever, stress because they have 5 other assignments they have to do, that person is not going to get as good of a grade. Doesn't matter how much stress that they felt, because I just have to evaluate that finished essay.
Yeah.
So the difference between 1 or 2 points here and there, it really does come down to those details. Did you spell my name correctly in the endorsement? Which is not to be vain, but again,
yeah,
I don't want you as in my student, to leave high school and go apply to a job, and you write a cover letter and you misspell the name of the person who's going to be reading the cover letter. That's not going to play well.
Right.
Same thing if I'm writing to an agent or an editor. If I don't get their name right, what else have I not gotten right?
Right.
What other details am I overlooking in the interest of just being too fast and too hasty?
Right. That makes sense. And now that I think back, or now that I remember back, the comment that she wrote on her essay or her discussion, whatever it was, I think it was something along the lines that, it was a great essay, really good work, but it was a 97. Like it's Amanda. Yeah, Amanda was like, what the fuck? Like, why can't I just get the 3 points? But I was just like, it's a 97. Like, you still got the A. So, and she's like, no, but, and I was like, all right, whatever. Like, I guess, like I said, it's all subjective on the teacher's opinions, I guess, based on what she was doing at that point in time.
So what I will say in college is that a 90 class average is the same as a 100 class average. They weigh the same.
Yeah.
So you can tell her at the very least, okay, it's not hurting you that bad.
Yeah.
If you stay in the upper A territory, you're good.
You're good, yeah. Because an A is still an A at the end of the day.
An A is an A,
yeah.
A 90, either 100. Obviously, before you get to the end of the class, you want to maintain as high as possible, because if you take a blow, it could dip, but 90 is no different than 100.
Yeah. How, you said that you were an adjunct at TAMU, right?
Yeah, so I adjuncted at TAMU.
So how is that different how do you feel is different between being an adjunct at TAMU and being
a high school teacher?
Yeah, high school, full-time high school teacher?
So at least in the United States, being an adjunct, I guess it's not really given a lot of respect. So
what does adjunct even mean?
Adjunct is just like,
because I really don't know.
It's just like a lower tier on the professor.
So you're not a full-blown professor?
No, you're not. Okay. So you would be, I think, an associate professor, as like to be hired as a full-time instructor.
Gotcha.
So an adjunct is treated as part-time, and that's not just at one university or or two universities. It's like nationwide. That's just the culture.
Okay.
Because universities want to attract PhDs to come to the school, because the PhDs are the ones who get research money. So they apply for grants. They say, I'm going to do this type of research. I'm going to do this type of experimentation. I need money to do that. That money benefits the school. So if we're talking about, let's say, TAMU or UTSA or A&M, their interest is in attracting high-quality PhD professors to either teach the courses or to do the research. Now, a lot of professors, especially tenured professors, they don't want to teach classes like English 1301 or English 101, 102.
Right.
They want to just spend time doing research or teaching their specialized, upper level courses, the 3,000 level, the 4,000, the graduates.
Yeah.
So the adjuncts, usually these are the people who are getting the degrees at the time. So they're your doctoral candidates, or they're your students working on master's degrees. They're the ones who get put into the slots where they teach those intro level courses.
Gotcha.
And not just English, but your bios, your
so did you
histories.
teach like summer sessions, or was it like full-blown spring, fall semesters?
I taught spring and fall semesters.
But you say part-time, like how does that work? Like is it just night classes, or is it just,
No, so your contract is basically part-time contract. So you're not paid a salary.
So it's like 1 semester or 2 semesters?
Correct.
Okay,
so
gotcha.
You apply for a semester, and then they say, all right, you're going to teach maybe 3 classes or 4 classes, and you're paid per class.
Okay.
So let's say a university has you teaching English 101 or English 1301. That will be, let's say, $2,000, and then that money is divided up across the months that you're teaching the course.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
So you'll earn your paycheck based on that, but it's not salaried.
Right, yeah.
So you're part-time in that sense, even though a lot of adjuncts, depending on how many classes they get, it can start to resemble a full-time workload.
Yeah. How tough is it first of all, how many classes did you teach in 1 semester?
When I was there, I taught 4. That was the maximum amount.
At one time?
Yeah.
Damn. And so how tough is that to Because I mean, you have what, 35 students, maybe a little bit more than
30. It usually maxes out around 30.
Okay, yeah. So 30 students times 4, that's
120.
120 kids. Like,
Yeah.
that's 120 papers to
Right.
judge, or not to judge, but to grade, and all that stuff. How, like, basically, how did you juggle all those papers or all those kids?
It's challenging, especially because you're not just grading one essay, you're grading 3 or 4 essays throughout a semester, and the first are maybe short, so they're pretty easy to get through.
Yeah.
But they get more rigorous as time goes on. So by the end of a semester, you might be grading an essay that's 5 or even 8 to 10 pages long in length, and so that's 120 essays. Assuming they all turn it in, they don't all turn it in.
Right.
So
yeah.
that can be a blessing sometimes in disguise.
Yeah.
So sometimes I'm grateful. I'm like, okay, I know that these students are gonna have a harder time, but
Yeah.
it does make the grading easier, especially when you have deadlines you have to meet.
Right.
Or the college might ask you, hey, we need you to submit your data to us about this particular assignment, because for accreditation purposes, a university needs to assign certain types of assignments, and then they ask their instructors to provide artifacts or data to prove that, hey, we're teaching this, and we have a high percentage of students who are meeting the college and career outcome.
Oh,
Whatever it is.
okay.
Like, they have certain standards.
Yeah.
Like, for example, the state of Texas has the TEKS, or the Texas Education Knowledge and Skills.
Yeah.
Colleges have the CCR, College and Career Readiness Standards.
Okay.
So they each have like certain objectives that they have to fulfill
Gotcha.
to get accreditation and to receive public funding. Private institutions might be different, but
Yeah.
public universities, that's part of their requirements. So I got off track. So
No, you're good.
in university, you have to be grading a lot of essays, like you said.
Right.
But that's really all you're doing. So unless they pull you onto a committee, you're grading pretty much all your spare time.
Right.
What's challenging about high school is that high school, there's a lot more oversight. So you're not just responsible for grading, you're responsible for maintaining contact with parents.
Oh,
You're
that makes
responsible
sense,
for maintaining documentation
yeah.
for special populations, students who have special needs,
Mm-hmm.
or students who are not native English speakers.
Yeah.
Especially in the state of Texas, there's a lot of emphasis on that.
Mm-hmm.
So we have the TEKS, and then we have the ELPs. And the ELPs are English language proficiency standards.
Okay.
So we have to make sure that our non-native English speakers are also learning English proficiency in the classes. You have your gifted and talented students, who you have to make sure are also meeting certain requirements.
Yeah.
You have to make sure that your other responsibilities, because maybe you have clubs, or maybe you are in another type of teaching mentorship position that requires you to do observations of other teachers.
Yeah.
You have to do lesson planning. So
That's true.
School districts differ in their expectations, but almost all will require you to provide lesson plans per week or per month. In the best case scenario, per quarter, gives you more time to work on them. But there is always an expectation of, like, we need to know that you're doing your job correctly.
Right.
So they expect you to be submitting different types of documentation, plus the grading.
Right.
So as an English teacher, that can be very challenging, because math teachers, for example, I don't want to stereotype, but generally they're not reading 10-page essays.
Yeah.
History might, right? But different requirements, and every discipline has its challenges. But it can be tough to juggle all the paperwork in the ELA realm.
Yeah. Which one do you feel, having done both, which one do you feel is more challenging?
Definitely teaching high school.
Really?
Just because of the level of requirements and paperwork that you have compared to the university.
Yeah.
And I think also the student, not to say that the students are bad in either case,
Right.
but there's more, I think, motivation on the part of the college student, because the college student decides, I want to come to college.
Yeah.
Or maybe they don't really want to. Maybe that's an expectation that a parent has, or that, society has.
But at the end of the day, they choose to be there.
They're still making the call. Whereas, a public school student, naturally, they don't necessarily want to be there.
Yeah, they're forced to be there.
They're bound to be there. So
it
can be challenging to motivate them.
Yeah.
Especially secondary students. They've seen it all. They're jaded. They know that not every assignment that they work on is going to count.
Yeah.
Or they know that, I can kind of press my luck with certain teachers, and it can be challenging to sort of keep them on task compared to the college students.
Right.
But I will say working with students is the best part of either job. It's definitely the most gratifying.
Yeah.
So it's the most dynamic, it's the most enjoyable, and it always is very validating when a year later or multiple years later, students reach out to you and they say, I still remember your class and it really made an impact on me, and I hope you're doing well. Like you inspired me. Maybe they're pursuing writing.
Yeah.
And I pray for them.
Yeah.
But that's very validating too. So it's not to say it's all tough. There is that bright spot, but
Yeah.
it can be challenging as a job.
That's cool. As a little joke, have you ever written the question mark at the top of the paper? Because I've had that several times, and I've seen that as a meme lately on the internet, where they write a question on the front page of the paper, and they write a question mark. The teacher writes a question mark, and the meme is basically like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing either. Like, if you're just as lost as I am, like, have you ever done that? So.
Not that specifically, but sometimes students, let's say they're writing a literary analysis on like a poem. So let's take Emily Dickinson. I could not stop for death, so he stopped for me, right? And so they'll put the title of the poem as the title of the essay.
Oh.
And I'll circle that and I'll write, what about it? Like,
what about it?
What are you trying to say? Because you're not writing the poem.
Yeah.
The poem already exists. It was published 300 years ago.
Right.
What are you saying about it?
Right.
And I still, to this day, I get really vague titles, even after telling them multiple times, like, your title needs to communicate something about the book, or the essay, I should say. And so if it doesn't, I'm confused. Like, imagine that you're writing to a reader. What do you want the reader to take away from the essay?
Yeah.
If the reader doesn't know what to take away, or the reader's confused, I personally feel that is a mistake on the part of the writer. So if I'm going through an essay and I have questions about this thing or that doesn't seem logical, or, hey, this evidence doesn't seem to connect to the claim you're making here.
Right.
There's misalignment. Those are all things that I feel that the writer needs to tighten up on. That could have been fixed in revision or editing. Because imagine it's like, I tell them it's like being on a roller coaster. Think about if you've been to Six Flags at San Antonio, Bugs, Whitewater Rapids. Yeah. So that's obviously it's a gentle ride, relatively speaking. It's for kids.
Going off topic, the last time I went on that ride, I was like 5 years old. That's the last time I ever went. Yeah, it's still there.
Yeah. So I think I was about that same age. So that ride is really gentle, but that's what the experience should be like when you're reading something.
Right.
It shouldn't be hard to read. You shouldn't be struggling to understand. You should be struggling with the content. If the content is challenging or provocative, that should be where the struggle is, not in trying to understand what you're reading.
Right.
So I try to tell the students that I don't want the Batman where you're doing loop-de-loops and loop-de-loops.
Yeah.
By the end of it, you want to hurl.
Yeah.
That should not be the experience of reading a book or an essay of any kind. And that applies to academic writing or creative writing.
Right. Do you use the same analogy with your kids?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll show them videos. I'll pull up a YouTube video of the POV of being on the Bugs and the POV of being on the Batman. And I'm like, okay, you want this to be your essay. You want Bugs, Whitewater Rapids. At most, you get sprayed with a little water at the end. It's a little challenging, but not enough to disengage you. You don't want the Batman where you're spinning around. So, adrenaline junkies, writing is not where you're gonna find it. Right.
That's cool. I like that you use that analogy because that totally made sense. But yeah, I asked that question because, and I'm not saying that you might be that teacher, but whenever the teachers would do that, or I even see that meme, it's like this teacher's being so condescending. Like, I don't know, like, I don't know what I'm doing either, but I get it. Like when you put it in that aspect, it's like, okay, that makes sense.
I mean, to be totally professional, no, you shouldn't do those things, of course.
Yeah.
You should be supportive.
Right.
But it's just to give some insight into, we're humans too. We've been doing this a long time. Even me, many teachers have been teaching for decades. I'm still within a decade of teaching, but, I've graded hundreds of essays.
Yeah.
You see the same things pop up over and over. It does get frustrating.
Yeah.
And, for example, I can tell when a student in the header, they have like a header in Calibri and not Times New Roman.
Oh, okay.
And I can spot that immediately.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's you missed that detail.
Yeah.
That's going to cost you points.
Yeah, because the font is completely different from
Right.
the rest of their essay.
Right.
Yeah.
And they won't spot that because
Yeah.
they don't know. They haven't had that experience.
Right.
But, you know, if I'm a professional editor or I'm a professional agent or whatever, and I've read hundreds of books or hundreds of letters, you know, I'm looking for those things too. I'm spotting those things. Yeah.
Yeah. That's crazy. You know, and the other question that I was going to ask you, being a high school teacher and teaching seniors, do you make your kids read the typical Shakespeare and, you know, all those novels? Because when I went through high school and I was doing English, I absolutely hated fucking reading about Shakespeare and fucking writing essays about him. And it's like, dude, I don't care. Like, teach me how to write an essay for college because that's what's coming up. So do you do that too, or?
So what I will say is that a lot of teachers don't have a lot of flexibility as far as what they can teach. So we receive curriculum. So depending on the school district, they have curriculum writers and they produce, it's called a scope and sequence of your year. And so it's broken up into units.
Yeah.
So, you know, from August to October, you're going to be covering poetry. From October to December, you're covering fiction or prose. And so the college essay might be tucked into Unit 8 at the end of the year.
Yeah.
And so I totally understand that students feel like it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You know, when is the average student going to draw on knowledge of Shakespeare?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, in his or her daily life. Never.
I can't remember the last time that I ever,
Right.
you know, referenced back a Shakespeare novel in my adulthood life, you know. So
Right. And so I totally understand that. Sometimes it's not the teacher's choice that they cover that material. Now we're English students, you know, we appreciate Shakespeare and we like classic literature. Most of us do, at least. And so, you know, if I teach like The Great Gatsby, I like Fitzgerald as a writer.
Oh, you said that title and I just like, oh, that was that book that yeah, it brought back a memory there.
So I mean, to your point, right? You as a student might not have a connection to The Great Gatsby or Fitzgerald.
Right.
It's a teacher's job to kind of make that connection and to say, look, there's a reason we're reading this. It might seem boring, but you're going to take something away from the experience. And I think a lot of teachers forget or
they expect their students to know.
Maybe they
make the connection.
Yeah, or they don't spend enough time making that connection.
Right.
And that's not because they're not able to, but it is, like I said, it's a tough job. You're trying to survive half the time.
Yeah.
It can be a struggle to make that connection. But, you know, when we read fiction, I guess I'll mention that the idea is to take lessons from it.
Yeah.
So think about driver's ed. We all see the videos where the motorcyclist crashes into the car or whatever. How many students drive safely after that?
Probably,
Few of them.
Yeah.
So even though it's a very graphic example, they don't internalize the knowledge.
Right then and there.
Right.
Yeah.
It's only until they have, you know,
a close accident or
the
a fender bender or something.
or they have the fender bender.
Yeah.
Or something that could have been really, you know, terrible, and they avoid it at the last second, and then they realize, okay, that was the point of the lesson.
Right.
That was the point of being a defensive driver. And now you can believe that every time they're driving, they're going to be applying that knowledge.
Right.
And maybe they'll get complacent and then have another close call, and then they learn it again, right? So learning is not this thing where I've learned the lesson and now it stays with me forever.
Right.
You know, it's going to ebb and flow as my life experience changes. So a story is the best way to teach somebody because you can experience what the characters experience. So as the character is going through his or her journey,
right,
you're accompanying them on the journey vicariously.
Right, yeah, without you actually living,
correct,
you know, those mistakes or, you know,
Yeah, so you learn what the character's experiencing, and now you're saying, okay, I liked what the character did because it ended up with this outcome. So I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to apply that in my life. Or you know what? It was a tragedy. This character had a character flaw. He was too proud, or he was too selfish. He was too arrogant.
Yeah.
He neglected his family. Whatever the case is, I'm going to try not to do that in my own life. Or
right.
I'm going to reflect on what I'm doing. So when a teacher has you read The Great Gatsby, right, it isn't just to bore you. It's to have you think about, what did the characters go through? What does that teach you? And then what does that teach you about the author Fitzgerald? What does that teach you about the time period that he lived in? You know, the Jazz Age. You know, what do we learn about the excesses of spending all your money and living irresponsibly?
Right.
And how does that affect your family, your wife, your daughter? So those are what we're English teachers are trying to do when we cover books. Yeah. So like I was saying, the goal is really to get the student to think about his or her own life and to apply the lessons of the literature to what he or she's doing, and to learn about history and to learn about how people have navigated problems throughout different cultures, different time periods, etc.
Yeah. You say that, and I wish my teachers, maybe I didn't pay enough attention. Maybe they did try to make that connection. But looking back and thinking really hard, I don't think they made that connection or attempted to, and I wish they would have, because I think I would have been more invested.
Yeah.
But then again, that's looking from an adult mind into the child mind that I was back then. So
yeah.
I don't know, like thinking right now, I probably would, like, how do I explain it? As a 28-year-old, I would have been more invested, but as a 17, 18-year-old, I probably wouldn't have been more invested.
Right.
But I do think that they didn't try to make that connection. And that's tough, like I don't think everybody has that talent, I guess you could say.
It is, and I don't want to speak badly about teachers.
Right, and I'm not trying to either, so
yeah.
forgive me, but yeah.
No, and I know you're not, but to come back to it, what I would say again is that a lot of teachers it's a tough job. They're burnt out, or they're juggling a lot of things. When you sit down and you write your lesson plan, or you have this assessment coming up. In the state of Texas, we have the STAR, for example, and STAR end of course. So your expectation is, I need to finish. I need to meet these objectives. So sometimes you can lose sight of the forest for the trees, and you fail to remember, wait a minute, why am I really teaching this to the students?
Right.
It's not because we want to do well on the test. It's because there's this other more subtle component. It's like Mr. Miyagi asking Ralph Macchio to wax the car, right?
Right, yeah.
It's
wax
not
on,
that
wax
he's
off.
teaching him how to wax the car. It's he's teaching him, how to internalize those movements that he's going to be using in a fight.
Right.
So when I ask a student, for example, to write an essay, it's not because I want you to know how to write an essay. It's because I want you to know how to organize your ideas. I want you to know how to articulate yourself properly. I want you to know how to support yourself intellectually, cognitively. That's not always going to be in an essay.
Right.
That could be in an argument.
Right.
Maybe you need to defend an idea in your professional life. Maybe personally, that's going to make the difference between you keeping a friend or losing a friend.
Right.
Keeping a significant other or losing a relationship. So all of those things, it could be the difference between life or death. Who knows?
Yeah.
In whatever situation you find yourself. So that's really the utility of ELA. That's why I always say ELA is the most important. They all are important.
Yeah.
It's about making someone well-rounded. But yeah, those are the things that I think we forget to communicate to our students, to really show them what we're doing here doesn't seem like it will be effective, but
right. It seems monotonous.
It seems monotonous.
Yeah.
And it seems irrelevant.
Yeah.
Even to something like science, where at least you're learning about gravity or physics,
right.
things that you interact with. But the ELA stuff, you're doing that every day too. When you communicate with your parents, or when you communicate with your siblings, when you're writing, or you're trying to say something on social media, maybe you see something that upsets you, and you want to speak out about it. But what skills are you going to draw on to articulate those thoughts?
Right. You don't want to seem illiterate, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. And the difference between someone paying attention to what you have to say or ignoring you altogether has to do with your ability to communicate,
right,
verbally and written.
Yeah. So you say that, and I think I remember seeing a post. I can't remember when it was, but basically it was along the lines saying that if you can write a paper, you can speak well, or you can, basically come up with it. Like if you need, like you said, if you need to come up with an argument or a defense or something like that, like you're gonna be able to handle your own, basically handle your own. So.
Yeah, think about an essay as like a speech, but it's to be read.
Yeah.
And most people who speak publicly, they didn't just manifest the speech then and there.
Right.
They rehearsed it.
Yeah.
They practiced it. They thought through what their talking points were going to be, and it wasn't just an overnight process. Maybe they were working on that for weeks or even months,
Right.
depending on how far in advance they knew about it. So, a public speaker, I guarantee you, they can probably write very well too, because those skills are related. They're sister skills.
Yeah, that's cool.
And same thing with reading. You can't be a good writer without being a good reader. So if you don't read well, your writing is going to suffer.
Well, I definitely fall into that category because I don't read a lot, but I don't really write that well either, and I hated writing. That's one of the main reasons why I probably dropped out of college, because the rest of my 2 years was just nothing but essay writing, and it's just like, I don't want to fucking do this.
Yeah. But again, what they were trying to teach you, and that's a flaw in our education system,
right,
at the college level, but also at the public school level, is that we're just not telling students why we're really doing these things.
Right.
It isn't to teach you about an essay, because generally speaking, most people are not going to write essays in daily lives.
Right.
It's telling you how to think, and at an advanced level, especially if you're going to be an engineer or you're going to work in business, like, you need to be able to put together thought A, B, C, D, E, F, G,
and articulate all that.
And articulate it.
Yeah.
And advanced, sophisticated topics, and you need to be able to communicate that clearly to somebody, especially someone who doesn't know what you're talking about.
Right.
So it's, how do you teach that? How do you communicate that in a way that's clear but also accessible?
Yeah.
That's really, I would argue, one of the core things that college or education in general is trying to teach students.
Yeah. And it's funny that you say that, because I basically dropped out of college because, for one, I'm not a school person. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't think I've ever really been a school person. I was always been forced to read, and especially stuff that I didn't like. So when it came down to sitting down and studying, reading, and basically writing, I felt like it wasn't for me, basically. So, but I was doing aeronautical engineering, so I was doing classes like aviation science. I was doing classes like aviation investigation and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So when you put it into that aspect, I wish the teachers would have harped on the reason you're writing this essay, and the reason why you're writing it this way is because when you get into whatever fucking field you're getting into, you're going to be writing investigation reports, and you're going to want to articulate them in a clear and concise manner, so that when people read the report, there's no miscommunication, there's no, there's no misjudgments about anything, basically, because when accidents happen, it's people's lives that matter.
Exactly.
And so
getting to the bottom of
why
did this incident happen?
Right.
And if you aren't able to do that in a clear way, and you miss a detail, and now you have a misconception about why it happened,
right?
Maybe more people pay for that.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And I wish they would have elaborated that, but at the same time, I feel like it should be my responsibilities to know that as well. But I don't know. I guess it's kind of like a flip of the coin, like which one you're really looking at.
Yeah. In education, there is this notion. It's not always correct, but there are no bad students. They're just bad teachers. I don't totally agree with that.
Yeah. I
do think ultimately teachers, as the ones who are responsible for dispensing the learning, and having to be hired, they have to exhibit a certain professionalism.
Right. We
are responsible for getting students engaged.
Right.
And if we don't, no matter how burnt out or how difficult our job is, we should take some responsibility for that. I think it's too easy to say the system is broken.
Yeah.
The students don't try hard enough. It's both. Everybody has to meet each other halfway.
Right.
I think, for it to work. So your instructors, maybe they could have done a better job of saying, this is why we're doing this. Maybe you could have done a better job of trying to meet them halfway.
Right, yeah.
But at the same time, the other consideration is that not everyone is built for that type of learning environment.
Right.
Where, similar to what I was saying earlier, a story teaches you, you're not going to learn by sitting down all the time and writing in a book. It needs to be kinesthetic, or it needs to be active. And some of us have different intelligences. We respond better to listening, or respond better to drawing. We respond better to working with our hands. So finding that for every student, that is challenging, of course, logistically speaking. But it does speak to, you probably were meant to be in a different setting,
right,
in order to learn the most efficiently.
Right. Yeah. In order to grab it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And the way that you basically said that, it just clicked. And now I want to go back and it's like, okay, now maybe I can sit down and write.
Right.
Yeah, if I just keep it in my head that the reason that I'm writing it this way, or the reason that I'm writing it in general, is because if I ever do get into that field, it's because of this.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just doing it just because they want to be fucking assholes or whatever.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So now I wanna go back, or at least look at my old documents, and it's like, like that's why.
Yeah.
So
No teacher goes into teaching to make your life hard.
yeah, it seems like that sometimes.
It seems like that, but
Yeah.
I promise you, if they're genuine about their job, they really do care. They do want to do well by the student. They want to do right. But the system and the amount of work sometimes complicates that, and
Yeah.
it can really make it challenging for teachers to do their job correctly. So, again, I don't want to pontificate about what we should be doing legally or politically as far as education.
Yeah.
But there does need to be reform. There does need to be another look at the system so that we can make sure that students are coming into the classroom and they understand why they're there and what the point of all of it is.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to ask you one more question before we close out the podcast. And this one is, again, from my wife. And she said, how do the skills you used to self-publish your book translate to your teaching? I don't know if that's a valid question or...
There's a lot of different skills, I think, that you require in both. So in teaching, there is a huge performative aspect to it, by which I mean when I go up in front of students, that's not really me. For example, like I'm publishing under R.H. Grund, right? That's my author pen name.
Yeah.
But that is a different persona.
Your alter ego.
My alter ego, right?
Yeah.
Than the teacher version of myself.
Right.
Which is not to say that I have different personalities. It's just the situation calls for a different response to it.
Yeah.
So it's almost like I don't do it consciously. It's like I'm a chameleon. If you sit me down here, I'm going to behave differently than if you sit me down in front of the students. Because in front of the students, I have to appear more energetic.
Yeah.
I have to perform. I have to catch their interest. I have to behave more like them. I need to express interest in the memes or the music videos or whatever it is that, that they're talking about. You
kind of have to relate with them in a way.
Correct.
Yeah.
So that is really a challenging part of that, which to some degree carries over into self-publishing, because like here, I can't behave the way I would behave in front of the students. I also can't behave the way I would behave if I'm just casually with friends or family. I have to maintain a certain professionalism because, again, I want to be taken seriously, or I want people to take the work seriously. So that aspect carries over, but it looks different in both fields. Obviously, the amount of work that I put into my writing applies also to what I do as an educator, and the documentation that I do. When I edit my writing, I'm using skills that I use when I edit students' writing, or when I evaluate them, or when I'm looking for them. And so it's academic and this is creative, but there's a lot of overlap there too. There's still attention to detail that is really important.
Yeah.
And again, the skills that I'm trying to teach the students, the literary analysis, what to take away from the book or the story, I'm trying to do the reverse of that in my writing. I'm trying to say, if you read my novel, you're going to take away this lesson. That's what I want you to take away. And so I have to make sure that is optimized in the book, just like I have to make sure that they're looking for the right things and the right clues in their own work or in their own stories that they're analyzing.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a valid point. Before we close out the podcast, do you want me to read random pages, or do you want to read them yourself?
I can read.
Yeah, cool. So. I just wanted to, I want to, since I haven't gotten this far in the book, or, I guess too far into the book, my wife suggested that we, pick and pull random pages, like
Sure.
2 or 3 pages, and then just kind of get your opinion on that setting, or, what the characters were doing. So.
Sure. So there was I forget the exact. Oh, here we go. I think this is a good selection. This is from the perspective. Those of you who aren't familiar with the book, it's called Room of Cloth, and it follows 2 siblings. So there's Sarah and Sebastian. And so Sebastian, like we were saying earlier, he's the one from the streets. He's the drug addict.
Yeah.
He's very rough. the sister, she's an English teacher too. That's a little bit of, I guess, me
Yeah.
seeping into her character. She has to spend a lot of time taking care of him. And, you know, like you were saying, tiptoeing around him, trying not to offend him. But there's a lot of resentment bundled up in that. So I'm going to read some of her background as far as how she feels about him.
Okay.
So I'm on page 54. Excuse me.
All right, cool.
Okay, so I'm starting in the middle of the first full paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
She realized a long time ago that she could never really know her brother. Before the night he stabbed their father to death, since the day he was born, in fact, he had disgusted her. She remembered being 6 years old, standing by her mother's bedside and looking on, horrified, at the doughy red thing in the pink blanket. A sci-fi mutant, a little monster. That had been curled up inside her mother all those months. This was the little brother she was supposed to love and take care of. That first night, as she listened to him crying in the next room, something even worse occurred to her. She had been just like that. She had grown inside her mother's belly. She had slid out, red and sticky. She had likely bawled and screamed. Everyone had. She didn't sleep for days after that. The crying didn't help. Day in, day out, all he did was cry. No matter how often their mother cradled him, cooed him, fed him, he wouldn't stop. After a while, Sarah just stood beside the crib and watched him. Finally, she figured it out. The warbling tongue, the pale gums, the dribbling drool. Of course he was crying. No one would like being trapped in that tiny body, trying to talk, trying to see, trying to get out. Confused by everything, and scared, terrified. And I'll move over a little bit to the next page.
Yep.
The noise didn't get any better as Sebastian got older. The noise only changed. At best, he was some annoying, whiny voice in her periphery, a little big-eyed imp constantly in the way. How many times did he try getting into her things, to go with her when she went out, to talk to her? He haunted the halls of that godforsaken house, waiting for her in the foyer when she got back from a late-night drive, taking her CDs, dropping her nail polish, choking on her gum, lighting her cigarettes, finding the goddamn birth control pills. Jesus, he was everywhere. Always peeking around corners, always following her like a shadow. Even if she didn't see him, she could hear the pitter-patter of his feet, a little rat scurrying in the dark. She kept her door locked at night, kept headphones on to block out the screaming and shouting coming from the kitchen. Eventually, the yelling would stop. Eventually, the crying would stop too.
That's very, I don't know, man. The way that I'm just going to describe the way that you write is very raw, very descriptive, and I love it. So I'm going to continue reading your book. One thing that I also noticed, I don't know if I've said it also, but descriptive, the way you describe the settings that your characters are in and what, you know, their emotions, their feelings. For example, like in that paragraph that you said that she came out, you know, pink and red, or, you know, slimy and red or whatever.
Right.
Like, I just feel for the very few books that I have read, authors are not like that. You know what I mean? Like, they're not that descriptive. And it makes the reader, like myself, more immersed in the book, so to speak. And I like that. So that's cool.
Thank you. One of the compliments I've received from different people over the years about my writing is that I'm very good at the, I guess, characterization, sort of getting into the head of the character and showing you how they see things. So, you know, you're getting snapshots there of her as a little girl, very young, and this is how she would see the brother, and then growing up with him and having this difficult relationship. And I don't have siblings. I'm an only child. So,
that says a lot.
Yeah,
I mean,
so if,
you would think otherwise.
yeah,
you would think otherwise.
So if this feels accurate, you know, I'm glad that it does, and that of course informs how she feels now in her present day, where she has to deal with the brother, and she regrets feeling these things about him.
Right.
And you know, when she regrets feeling that tension and thinking,
that resentment, basically.
Why can't I just love this guy?
Yeah.
You know, why is it so difficult? That's what I'm supposed to do.
Right.
Why am I, is it me? Is it him? You know, what is in the way? And so it's really trying to communicate that, because I think most people feel that we feel an obligation to say, I love what I do. I love my job. I love my children. I love my family.
Yeah.
But we don't always feel those things as strongly as we maybe feel that we should.
Right.
And so it's trying to illustrate that. And I think if I can do that, like you say, you will feel like the characters are real and you'll connect with them and you'll learn the lessons that they're learning, which is the point of the book.
Yeah. Yeah. Also the other thing too, when Sebastian gets into, I'll try not to reveal too much to anybody that hasn't read, but it was in those first few chapters, and you basically set the setting of her apartment or, wherever she was living. And the kitchen, I think you wrote something similar, something along the lines that the kitchen was very dark. There was a certain light peeking through the window. She had the stove light on. Everything else was dark. Everything was kind of dirty. The dishes were there. And for me reading that, I could just picture it and the setting that you put it in. And I feel like it just, how do I say it? It just it makes the book that much better. The descriptive details. So I commend you for that. So
cool.
But closing out the podcast, just give your people the socials. Any events coming up? You had a couple of reading events that you did recently. You did one at RAD, right?
Correct. So I had a reading first at On the Rocks Tavern. This was on April 7th or 8th, that Friday. So big shout out to Eddie and Tino for hosting and allowing me to read there. And then I also had a reading at Cafe Radical last weekend, excuse me. So again, thank you to Billy and Rochelle for giving me that platform. And I'll be doing an upcoming reading at Dosis.
Nice.
On May 31st.
Cool.
Yeah.
Nice.
As far as socials, so you can find me at RH Grund Writing. That's on Instagram and Twitter. And that's spelled RHGRUND and then writing as in writing.
Cool. Awesome. Anything else that you want to say to the audience before we close out?
Yeah, so whoever's watching, whether you're from Laredo or not, if you are interested in horror writing, or if you like what you've heard here, or if you like some of my philosophy as far as writing is concerned, I encourage you to check out my socials. Check out my website, check out the Amazon page for Room of Cloth. I have sample excerpts from the book that are there. You can read the first few pages, see if you like it. It's available as an ebook for $4.99, and it's available paperback for $14.99. And at the end of this book, there's also an excerpt from my upcoming novel. It's called Simulacrum. That will be published in October. I don't want to put a hard date on that, but I am angling for an October release of that. I'm just in the process of finalizing the cover art and making sure that it's all good to go.
That's cool. Awesome. I feel like there's a lot of more questions that I want to ask, but I don't want to keep the podcast too long because then I'll lose the audience. But
we'll do a part 2.
Yeah, definitely. I always tell people, for all the guests that I've had so far, I always tell them there's going to be a part 2 for sure. So definitely with you, there's definitely going to be a part 2, especially when you release your other novel. So Roy, I thank you for coming on the show. Thanks for being a part of the show. Thanks for being a guest. And for everybody watching and listening, please tell your family, please tell your friends. We are on YouTube, Spotify, Instagram, Facebook. And just a little announcement for everybody watching and listening. I know I've had feedback of the guests and their microphone issues. Sometimes we just get lost in convo that they forget that the mic is there. So just please bear with us. And as far as the episodes on Spotify, I don't have, I guess the how do I say it? I basically have to pay to keep the episodes on. So if you want to listen to previous episodes, you can find them on YouTube and you can watch them or listen to them there. And just thank you for everybody watching and listening. It really means the world, and all the feedback that you guys have given. Episode 10 is coming up in a couple weeks. But for now, thank you for watching and listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe and tell your friends. Thanks, everybody.
All right, thank you.